I'm getting ready to shoot my upcoming short film, and I want it to look nostalgic because it's about appreciating these simple everyday moments in time that I share with my wife. And that's why I'm considering using this vintage Nikon 24mm lens, but here's the challenge. I'm shooting the film solo and I'm in half the shots. And that's where my modern Tamron 17 to 28mm lens would make things significantly easier because it has autofocus and wireless aperture control from the Creator app. So do vintage lenses actually make your footage look more cinematic and nostalgic, or can a modern lens get pretty close to matching the look of my vintage lens? And quick note, on both lenses I will be using my Nikon 1/8 black mist filter. This helps give my highlights a nice glow to add to that nostalgic feel. And I'm also using my Freewell 2:5 and 6:9 stop variable ND filters to cut some of the light out. And here's the results. After reviewing the footage and using both of these lenses the way that I intend to for my short film, I do feel like the vintage lens does add a bit more character and have a bit more of a unique look, especially when you start to look at the edges of the frame, which start to look more soft and imperfect. On both the lenses, the center of the frame actually looks pretty sharp in both images, but on the vintage lens, the flares are less controlled and more prominent, which I actually liked for this merry-go-round scene. But for the car scene, flaring was just a bit out of control, and you can tell that the vintage lens loses a ton of contrast if you're shooting anything backlit, which that's up to your personal taste. But for me personally, I actually preferred the look of my modern Tamron lens just because I like that it retained a bit more of contrast and the flares weren't distracting. For this dinner scene, again, I noticed that there's a little bit less contrast in the vintage lens, and you can tell by just looking at my face, which just looks a bit more soft and has a bit more of a glow compared to my modern lens, which it does look like a filmic glow that I like. However, when I use a enhancer to color grade my footage, I can always add some bloom to get closer to that vintage look if I wanted to. Now, the term cinematic is incredibly subjective, but to me, what makes an image look cinematic is not only the look of the lens, but also the color grade, the composition, the lighting, and the environment. And after doing this comparison, I feel like those aspects do most of the heavy lifting in terms of making my image look cinematic. Now, as I expected, I did find having no autofocus in my vintage lens being a huge challenge, especially because I was filming myself in these scenes, and I just had to keep checking if I was in focus, which for some shots I had to actually refilm them because I noticed my focus was slightly off. And every time I did switch back to my Tamron lens, which has autofocus, I was just so much more grateful because once I see that white box around my eye, I know that my focus is just going to be tack sharp. So ultimately, I decided that I'm going to be using my modern Tamron lens just because as a solo filmmaker, having autofocus was incredibly helpful, and it's worth more to me than the slight character that my vintage lens offers. And this will allow me to focus on other aspects that make a film look cinematic, like the color grade, the lighting, and the composition. And I recently started using the Sony Creator app a lot more, which that helps a ton because I can control my aperture and also adjust my focus points just by tapping. So those are really helpful tools for me, and if you're a solo filmmaker as well, I think you should definitely give it a try. I'm really happy I did this lens comparison before filming my actual short film because it just helps me feel a bit more prepared, and also it gave me the answers I was looking for in terms of which lens to use and which lens would be right for me. And if I could summarize it, yes, vintage lenses do add more character to your image. However, to me, it's just not worth losing autofocus, and again, if you can just focus on those other aspects that make your image look cinematic, then I'm sure your film or project will turn out fine. So anyways, that is all for this video, and if you do want to see more of my process and my short film that I have coming out later this month, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.